Welcome to the Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
Larry Kreider here with the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast, and with me today in the studio is my good friend for many years, Kevin Eshelman, Senior Pastor at Ephrata Community Church, and you serve in the local school board, and you serve in the leadership team of HarvestNet International, on and on and on. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Larry, for inviting me to be part of this. I'm excited about it. I feel honored to be brought on and to be here, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, people look at you, and obviously your preaching abilities, your leadership abilities, and think, wow, could I be like Kevin Eshelman? I mean, really, you've got such a grace on your life as a leader. And we try to do in this podcast is get the stories behind the stories. You know, what was it like when you weren't in leadership, just aspiring to leadership or learning things the hard way, all those things. So,
right.
Okay, you're a senior pastor at Ephrata Community Church.
Right, yes.
And you serve with Barry Whistler on the leadership team of HarvestNet International?
Right, yes, that's correct. I would be actually considered vice president of HarvestNet International.
Okay. And don't you serve in a local school board for many years?
Yes, so for Cocalico School District, board of directors, I'm approaching 20 years on that board.
20 years,
yeah,
really?
So right, it's hard to believe. Time really does fly. And so for the past, I think it's 2.5 years or so, I've been president of the board. I would have served there as vice president for about 12 years, and then the past 2.5 years as president of Cocalico School District Board of Directors.
Wow, that's amazing. That's just 3 that I'm aware of. Are there other areas of leadership you're involved in I'm probably not even aware of?
Well, I think that's pretty much enough. I'll keep that. I serve with TNT Youth Ministry as well.
Sure.
And have served on that team, that leadership team, for probably since almost like its inception.
Sure.
And just enjoy doing whatever I can do to influence things and help things move in the right direction, serve, biblically, of course. The heart of leadership is service.
Exactly.
And so it's not about like having your way. It's about how do I actually help move things along.
That's exactly right. I've seen you do that again and again. I think I first met you because of our involvement together with what we call the regional church. Just having a heart for the whole body of Christ and how do we work together and how we bring the walls down. And
exactly.
I think in those days you were involved in Youth for Christ, if I remember.
I was a public school campus minister for Lancaster Youth for Christ.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, amazing. Well, let's go way back. Let's go back to the early days. Talk about how you grew up, and did you, in those days, expect to be in leadership in the future? And what did that look like? How did you come to Christ? Tell us your story.
Yeah, well, I grew up, I've lived in Lancaster County all my life.
Okay.
I've actually never resided even outside for any kind of schooling or anything.
Okay.
I've always lived here, outside Mount Joy, between Mount Joy and Elizabethtown.
Okay.
And so I'm about as local as you could possibly imagine. Really? And never really even aspired to leadership. So like going through school and high school and so forth, like I was never captain of sports teams and things like that, never in a place of influence in school specifically.
Interesting.
Now outside of school, I would have had 2 leadership opportunities which would have fed into some of the things that I'm doing today. One is actually with 4-H. So I grew up on a dairy farm and my family would have been a part of local dairy 4-H clubs. And I would have served as president at one point through that, and then also our local youth group.
Okay,
so
you grew up in a local church in Lancaster County.
Yep, West Green Tree Church of the Brethren is my home church.
Church of the Brethren.
Church of the Brethren,
That's
West
really
Green Tree.
Interesting, because I also grew up in the Church of the Brethren. That's
I thought that was the case.
Yeah. And so you're involved in leadership there?
I was, actually. So in the youth ministry there, and then even as a young adult to some degree, had some leadership opportunities. And in both of those cases, when it came to both 4-H as well as the local youth group, to give young people an opportunity to step into a place of leadership and just kind of try it out.
Right.
That's very, very significant. So even when it comes to things like, 4-H Club, for example, would have operated out of a sense of, there would have been a portion of it that would have been parliamentary procedure and learning that. And honestly, even when I'm running a school board meeting now, my brain will sometimes go back to like, okay, now how exactly is this done?
That's amazing.
Because parliamentary procedure would have been a part of how that would have operated then.
Yeah. So talk about your spiritual life. Talk about how you came to Christ and what did that look like. And that all happened through the Church of the Brethren, or how did all that work?
Yeah, well, at West Green Tree, my parents were deacons there, and so I saw them operate in a place of leadership. Loved church, loved even some of the things I was seeing happening as a young person. Gave my life to the Lord very, very young, like at age 6 or so.
Wow.
Now, in that church setting, you don't really become part of the church until you're like 11, 12, and you get into baptism and memberships all tied together. And but I would have had a time of, I don't know if you would call it a crisis of faith, or I would have had a few things that happened in my life that were less than ideal, and that had to do with a friend dying in a car accident, my mother's illness, and eventual death. That would have been, I would have been my late teen years at that point. And so it really caused me to look for answers, and I felt like I couldn't find them. I mean, it doesn't mean they didn't exist. I just didn't know where to look for them. I'm a little bit of an introvert by nature, kind of shy, and so I wasn't.
Which is so interesting. Here you are in the leadership in a mega church, but I see that again and again.
Yeah.
Because I'm an introvert also. I get that, but that's so interesting. But keep on with your story.
Well, and part of that is then I think I didn't know how. Like now, I am looking back, of course. Then I didn't realize that I was kind of an internal processor, and I needed a place to process things externally, and I didn't know actually how to do that. And so I internalized. And so basically, I was told, hey, you just need to trust God. I don't know why these things happen. And honestly, my conclusion was, I'm not sure I can. Mm-hmm. And so I actually backed away from my walk with the Lord because of not sure if I could actually trust God with my life.
Sure.
And I probably would have lived, so I never pursued an immoral lifestyle or anything like that, but I just really backed away from the Lord until I met my wife Stephanie. And she would have gone through some pretty difficult times as well, and would have had the opportunity of having the same kind of reaction that I would have had, and just didn't, and just kind of remained firm to follow the Lord. And as I saw that, it convicted me that I needed to pursue the Lord no matter what. So I was about 22 or 23 years old that I felt the Lord. I mean, you could call it conviction, pressure is probably how I would have defined it at that point of, come on, man, you know what's true. Yeah. And you can avoid it all you want, but you still know what's true. Yeah. And so I remember praying a prayer in which it probably wasn't prayed in the best attitude towards the Lord. It was, okay, God, I will follow you, but this has to consume my life or I'm not going to do it at all. Wow. Like it's got to be 100% of my life or I'm not going to bother.
You were early 20s?
About 23.
Okay.
Yeah. And what I didn't know was that's what God wanted anyhow.
Exactly.
He wasn't looking for this halfway part, but my attitude probably wasn't the best in that moment. But God says, I'll take it. And we'll do with that as you see fit. And another key moment that I'll really just kind of emphasize, from that point as I pursued the Lord, God really brought me to a place of understanding and even releasing some things I didn't understand. But I remember a very key time. It was in March. I forget even exactly what year it was, but about like 1988 and 89. Mm-hmm. And I was farming at that point. It was a beautiful day. I was getting ready for spring plowing and so forth and was working on some equipment, and Charles Stanley was on the radio. And he preached a message about surrendering your life to the Lord completely, just saying, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I remember listening to it while I was working and just kind of coming to the point like, yeah, I'll do that. And just, it wasn't like I didn't hear angels sing or anything like that. It was just, I'll commit my life to the Lord to do anything he wants me to do. And little did I know what he had in mind when that, but he would oftentimes bring me back to that place of surrender. And I feel like that's a key part.
It is.
Of, God, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
Yes. It's a real process God took you through then.
Absolutely. Years long.
Yeah. And another thing we have in common, I just realized now, is your wife really was instrumental in making sure you're serving Jesus wholeheartedly. Yeah. And my wife did the same in my life. So it's amazing.
What would we do without them?
Exactly. Exactly. So how did the whole Youth for Christ thing happen?
Yeah, well, Larry, you probably don't remember that you were a key part of that.
I don't remember.
So this might be a little bit alarming to you. So I was, my wife Stephanie and I, when we got married, we felt we got to find a church for ourselves. It was in the Brethren in Christ Church is where I served. That's where I ended up being called to ministry. was farming and pastoring for a number of years. Felt like we needed to leave farming for full-time ministry. And God, through some sovereign arrangements, connected me with Youth for Christ. And I realized that there seemed to be a grace on my life for youth ministry.
Beautiful.
However, there were some practical theological understandings of what is traditional Youth for Christ and where I was at that point in my life.
Yes.
That I wasn't quite sure of how to manage that. And so it was laid in front of me as being like, this is a clear direction of where God has for me. But I was struggling with how that works out practically. And one morning, Stephanie and I were praying together, and I got this picture of a regular doorway. And above it, where it oftentimes would say exit, it said YFC, is what it said. And I remember just kind of almost in a passing conversation, I don't know what meeting we were in, I shared that with you, Larry.
Really?
And you felt like it, and just in your general way of doing that, you shared like, I feel like that's God's asking you to walk through that doorway.
Wow, so, I don't remember that. That's
no,
amazing.
I didn't think that you would. But it actually made my connection with public school ministry.
Yes.
And my role with Youth for Christ was to establish Christian ministry in every public school and public middle school and high school in Lancaster County.
Wow.
That was the task. And God gave grace to do that and accomplish that.
That's amazing.
But it was with some fear and trepidation in multiple ways of like raising funds to do that.
Sure.
And stepping into a very broad ministry was very challenging.
Sure. Give us some leadership truths, principles you learned during that time as you look back now. What are some things that you realize, I do this today because of what I learned back there?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One would be obviously to walk in that place of humility.
Good.
You know, sometimes as leaders you think about like, I need to get it all together. Like I need to know what I'm doing, how I'm doing it. And there's a sense of you're always called beyond your capacity.
That's good.
And it's actually a good thing.
Yes.
Because it's in that place where you're in a place of trust before the Lord, you're in a place of humility before the Lord, and you are living in that place of reliance, and it's constantly uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're looking for that place of comfort, June marks 30 years where I was initially called to ministry.
Wow.
I've not found that place of comfort yet. Have you?
Wow. That's a lifelong walk, isn't it? Yeah.
And even my role now at Ephrata Community Church, I will tell our team, this is the biggest thing I've ever led.
Yeah.
And next week it's going to be the biggest thing I've ever led. Like
Right.
as it grows, it's
Right.
constantly being pushed beyond.
Right.
And that's challenging,
It is.
but it's also a good place to be because we walk in a place of humility as a result of that.
So you walk in humility, that's key, obviously. What else did you learn back then or you're learning now as you continue to get stretched and pushed?
Yeah.
You know, you're right. We never arrive.
Right.
Arriving is called heaven. You know?
Right. That's right.
So what other things did you learn?
Well, and for me as well, during that time, so I moved from a very specific church ministry to a broad Lancaster County Youth for Christ ministry. So
now,
then,
were you farming when you were doing this?
No, actually I left farming at that point.
And this was a
This
walk
was
in
full-time.
faith,
Yep.
full-time
Yep.
ministry. And it's 30 years now since you started doing
Yep,
this.
absolutely.
Wow.
And so then it is, what are the essentials? Mm-hmm. So as we think about the body of Christ in Lancaster County, Ephrata Community Church has a very unique expression.
Right.
We have some doctrinal distinctives and so forth.
Yes.
But then what are those root things that we can agree upon through which we partner together to advance the kingdom?
Right.
So it was a matter of really thinking through what are those essentials, but biblical essentials.
Right.
Essentials.
Right.
But then what are those distinctives for me, personal convictions that I can sometimes put on a shelf or say, okay, it's not the most important thing that I lead with, but the advancement of his kingdom, the salvation of lost people through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like, what are those essentials that we can partner together around to see the kingdom advance?
So good, so good. And obviously part of that is your heart for the whole body of Christ, your heart for the kingdom, and that's who you are. That's who ECC is, who HarvestNet is, who we really are together. And we've been blessed in this county to walk together, so many of us, for so many years. And that's why I'm so honored to have you here with me today. So talk about some mistakes you made as a leader. Have you made any?
Never. Oh my goodness, the list is long. The list is long.
As you look back, what are some things you wish you would have done differently?
Oh my goodness.
You know, or mistakes. However you see that.
Yeah, one of the key things for me is understanding self. Like there's a place of confidence that leaders need to operate in that recognizes that, hey, you are not the complete package, right, and you really don't need to be the complete package.
Right. Boy, that's so good.
So to have a place of confidence just in my walk with the Lord, and then being able to, in knowing Him, then know myself.
Yes.
And know what I bring. So there's probably some things that I would have stepped into other people's expectations of who I am, mm-hmm, even out of a place of insecurity. Mm-hmm. That there's confidence comes when you know, this is who I am. Yeah. This is what I bring to the table.
Right.
I don't need to be everything to all people, but I can be confident in who I am and honor others and what they bring to the table as well.
Awesome.
So that teamwork part is just a critical thing.
Yeah, it really, really is. So continue your journey. So you were doing Youth for Christ and eventually got involved in, I think, Brethren in Christ Church ministry, if I can remember.
Yeah, the Brethren in Christ Church would have been before that, actually.
That's before that?
That was my initial call to ministry.
So you did that as you were involved in the farm and
yep,
all that together, okay.
Yep.
So Youth for Christ came after that, and then eventually you got involved in Ephrata Community Church. Was that
right,
the next step?
Right, yeah. So while I was ministering with Youth for Christ, of course, I wasn't a local church pastor, but we connected at that point in the late 1990s with Ephrata Community Church. That's right, where we decided to plug in, become a member of the church there. And then would have been actually ordained as an elder at Ephrata Community Church in 1999.
Okay. And then talk about the journey as to how you became senior pastor there.
Yeah, that's a bit of a long, again, I was just there, I'm here to serve. I think if I look at my old membership application, mm-hmm, I volunteered to be a small group leader and an usher. That was my...
It's back to that whole servant leadership thing you talked about.
Yeah.
You know, we need to walk in humility and be willing to serve. It's such a key for leadership.
Yeah.
So what transpired? How did that work?
Well, I was ordained there as an elder in 99, and then, of course, that was in a different place of leadership, mm-hmm, opportunities. We did know that my role at Youth for Christ would eventually come to a close because Youth for Christ carried a value for the local church to be involved in public school.
Okay.
And so I was a bit of a bridge builder, like helping the local church to be involved in public school. Mm-hmm. And so we knew that as that task was completed, that my task there, my job would actually come to a close.
Okay.
So the elders made an offer, like, as that comes to a close, would you actually step into different leadership roles here at ECC?
And would you be on staff, paid on staff to do that?
Yeah, so that would have begun in 2003.
Okay.
So I began as a 1 day a week job that became 2 days a week. I tell people that they weren't sure about me, so they just wanted to, we'll see if we can terminate this beforehand. And then I would have come on full-time in 2005 as an executive pastor.
Okay.
And it would have been within 2 or 3 years that Barry and myself would have actually begun talking about a transition, mm-hmm, where even in 2005, he would have been doing more with HarvestNet, right, and I was the local church guy.
And HarvestNet, for those, I mean, there's like 90 people from 90-some mm-hmm, nations who listen to this podcast. HarvestNet is a movement of churches based here in Lancaster County, yep, churches in the nations of the world. It's a movement, one of the fresh new moves of God, things God's doing. And so here in Lancaster County, for example, we have the HarvestNet family of churches, we have the Hopewell family of churches,
yep,
we have the Worship Center ministry, we have the Devon International family of churches.
Exactly.
And we're all blessed to work together.
That's amazing.
We've been friends forever, and we will continue to be, and see the kingdom built around the world. Yeah.
And when you think about that, it's stunning to think about what God has done.
Yeah, it is.
And the opportunity He's given us.
So what changed? I mean, of course, a lot changed, but tell us what changed when you went from being eldership role and then 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and eventually the transition, the succession, the senior pastor talked about that.
Yeah, well, we had a goal, and our prayer was we want a seamless transition. Mm-hmm. We didn't want speed bumps. We didn't want, like a major. Yeah. And so because of that, we actually put together like a 5-year plan of, I would actually increase in the amount of times I was preaching in the weekend services. I ended up doing more weddings and mm-hmm, that kind of pastoral care of the local congregation along that process. And Barry just regularly kind of stepped back a little bit more and more. That by the time I came to a congregational vote, and our bylaws and our expression it would require a congregational vote to actually say, yeah, we want Kevin as the next lead pastor.
Yeah.
And so we led into that to that time when it came, that was, kind of a non-event. We had strong affirmation from the congregation. And then eventually it was a matter of just simply putting a date in the calendar and saying, okay, this is the date when the transition occurs, which was in November of 2014. And it was part of our HarvestNet International Summit, so the larger part of the body could be a part of that. And man, God was gracious and kind.
It was awesome. I was there when it happened. It was awesome. Yeah.
And I sometimes think that, what was the big change after? Because so much was transitioning before.
Yeah.
I kind of jokingly say the big transition was changing my email signature at the end. But there actually was more transition that came as a result of that. Nothing, bad. It just was actually part of the reorganization and restructuring for Ephrata Community Church to continue to move forward.
And you would have felt the weight in the spirit of having the lead role in the way you didn't in the past. There is a difference.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you felt that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But God, man, incredibly gracious through all that. But I think
good.
one of the key things in that was Barry and myself and the elder team, hey, we care about the church.
Yeah.
We care about the advancement of the gospel.
Yeah.
And so regardless of whose name is in what position, one of the things we talk about at ECC is it's about function,
right?
Not necessarily about roles.
Right.
So you may have the title of lead pastor or an associate pastor or an executive pastor, but basically we're just doing our roles. We're functioning in our roles for the advancement of the kingdom.
That's so good. You guys have modeled that, and many people, many churches have looked at what you've done and been so blessed by just that the grace of God is on that whole process. And you work with Barry works with you work with all the others, and we all work together at the same time, which is just awesome.
Exactly.
Now, talk to us a little bit more about your role in leadership in the school district, in the school board, and how that happened. Give us some process, some steps there. I think there's a lot we can learn about that. By the way, if you want to know more about you, we're going to put your information on our show notes. Anybody, you want to know more about Barry, I mean, if you have any articles you've written, anything like that, books or whatever, we'll put all that on the show notes, so people can get to know who you are more and know more about Ephrata Community Church, HarvestNet International, everything that you walk in. So let's go back to Cocalico Area School.
Yeah, well, after my a 6 or 7 year stint with Youth for Christ, in which we were doing campus ministry, I just really developed a heart for the public school system. And even traditionally, as in the United States, it has been the church that has taken responsibility for public education. A pastor can become isolated from the world pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so we can end up living in a bit of a bubble.
That's right.
And I wanted to do some things intentionally where I would step into some public areas. And our kids were at Reamstown Elementary School at that point, and my wife was involved in the PTA. Mm-hmm. She comes home from a PTA meeting and said, hey, someone's stepping off the school board. They're looking for someone to run, and I think that you should actually run for school board.
So it's really easy for you. Your wife speaks for you. The Lord speaks through her.
Yeah, God sounds a lot like Stephanie, I think.
And I've said 100 times, God sounds a lot like my wife Laverne, so I get that.
Right. And it was unusual because Stephanie would sometimes coach me and, hey, you're doing too much, you're overcommitting.
Sure.
So when she came and said, hey, I think this is a fit for you,
it had to be God.
I thought something was up here.
That is
And
good.
so I stepped into it, and it's a bit overwhelming. For example, this is all public knowledge, so Cocalico School District, we have about 3,000 students. We have 5 buildings. Our buses drive 3,000 miles every day.
Wow.
Collecting students. We have a $60 million budget that we manage, hundreds of employees between professional and support staff. It's quite a task. And so then, of course, you're managing within state and federal regulations. So it's a little bit of like stepping into a deer in the headlights of, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
And I remember having those moments of, God, why am I here? And him being clear about the role of prayer in the public school. I do believe that Romans 13 is still in the Bible.
Yep.
So even governmental authorities is a delegated responsibility. And so I feel like I'm a gatekeeper there. And so my role as president currently of Cocalico School District Board of Directors, to some degree the buck stops with me. And I'm not running the school district, but the governmental authority rests there. And so it's a place for me to speak blessing and pray protection and do what I can do in wisdom and influencing the public school system in that way and navigating various seasons, even like the last season that we've been through, doing our best to stay the course and do what's best for our students.
So you're helping people we go through the pandemic. You're helping people in your local church.
Yeah.
In this mega church that you pastor, you're helping people in the school district all at the same time. That sounds like it could be a bit stressful.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny when I've meet people and what's your experience in the pandemic been like? And I said, well, I've been president of a local public school system, and I pastor a church. And people almost like take 2 steps back from me, like I'm expecting you to implode any moment here. But I really feel like in this season, I know it's been challenging, obviously, for anybody in any situation. But speaking of the public school system, I felt like as I reflect on that, I think what the school system needed was a pastor.
Yeah.
Just say, hey, we're going to stay the course. We're going to do the best that we can.
That's right.
We're going to navigate this locally. And both the public as well as our administrative team and teachers just kind of needed that steady pace to walk through that.
So today you're leading these different realms of leadership. Young leaders listening right now saying, Kevin Eshelman, help me. What are things I should know to prepare for the future? Are there things you would say to a younger leader and say, tell me the 2, 3, 4, 5 things that I should be aware of?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, a couple things. Well, first of all, I've already mentioned just keep your relationship with the Lord as your priority.
Yes.
That is what got you in the place of leadership.
Correct.
But it's oftentimes the first thing that gets neglected in a place of leadership.
Right.
So you got to know God. Second one is to know self.
Yeah.
Like be comfortable with who you are. It doesn't mean that God's not continuing to do the work and you're growing and Christ-likeness is still being formed in you. But also then be aware of there's a place of confidence. You aren't the complete package and you can bring yourself fully to the table. Comparison today could be the Achilles heel of leaders.
That's so true.
So when it comes to just be alert to how social media affects you. Be alert to how news affects you, what people say about you affects you. Just be aware that we're more connected, which is good, but can also bring some detrimental things to you as well.
That's very good. That's very true.
Learn from anybody, any place, anytime, anywhere.
You're a lifelong learner.
Oh my goodness, we must be.
Yeah, I agree totally.
We must be. I would, when it comes to mentoring, we have very specific mentors, like people that we would pursue directly. And when I was first called to ministry, there was a guy by the name of George Kimber, who was a Messiah College professor who at that point was pastoring in the Brethren in Christ Church. And so I had a few people like that as well. But man, I learned from anybody, any place, anytime.
Yeah.
So you can, like even with you, Larry, like you probably have no idea how much you've mentored me, even though you've never been an official mentor.
Right.
But watching you and how you operate in certain times, watching you as you're teaching, reading your books. I would name other people, even within the public school system. I would watch key leaders and specifically how they lead. And I'll mention something that's talking about mentoring from a distance.
Sure.
2 things that I've learned from George W. Bush.
I'd love to hear it.
Wasn't that strange? Which is kind of strange. I would never say, okay, George Bush was a mentor of mine.
Right.
But I've actually had 2 encounters with him. So when he was president, I was invited to a pastor's briefing. And he was not a part of that pastor's briefing. But one of his aides was there. And his aide just talked about, like, this is how George Bush manages himself.
Sure.
And one of the things he said was he never reads a newspaper.
Really?
That he actually had aides that would read a newspaper and then tell him what he needed to know.
Interesting.
And it was one of those things like, what is an appropriate measure of disconnect that we as leaders need so that we can stay the course and do what's right?
Yeah.
And not be swayed by all kinds of public opinion. That's kind of goes back to my comment about social media.
Right.
Like just be alert to how it affects you. And then I had another encounter with George Bush, which he was actually in Hempfield. He came to do a speech here. I was part of the Lancaster County Chamber of Commerce, and they welcomed him. And I was in a group of about 300 people in which he spoke.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed about him as I just kind of watched him in that setting was he's surrounded by Secret Service people, and people are kind of clamoring. But when he's having a conversation, he was so focused on the person he was speaking to.
That is so good.
And my understanding was Bill Clinton was very good at that as well. Very good at the personal part of that. And I just never forgot that. And so even, in our weekend gatherings, while there's, 1,000 people around at any one given time, that when I'm having a conversation, I want to be focused on the person that I'm speaking to. But part of that is we can receive mentoring from people that directly are connected with, and we can sit and I can say, hey, Larry, here's a situation that I'm facing. But then, man, we can receive so much from so many people if we're alert to observe. People that I've never met have taught me things about how to handle myself, about how I manage myself and manage leadership situations.
So good. so good, Kevin.
So no restrictions. Just learn from anybody.
Exactly. Well, look, you have so much inside you. I really want to have you back. In fact, here's what we're going to do. The one thing I really want to hear from you, we didn't even touch on, and that is I am so intrigued at how you speak publicly, how you minister, how you preach without notes. I don't know other people who do that. I'm sure there are other people, but I don't know other people who do that. I want to know how you do that. I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to know how you do that. And so I'll
share with you the secret.
Okay, well, I'd love to. We're going to have you back next week, and we're going to ask you that specific question. I'm going to have you tell us why you do that, how you do that. That's going to really, really help a lot of people. So thank you so much for having
Thank you so much,
me on the podcast today. And everyone who's listening, again, check out the show notes. Kevin Eshelman, Ephrata Community Church, HarvestNet International. Anything else about Kevin that you would like to know, you can find there. And tune in next week for our season 1 finale. We just is for our first season.
How about that?
Yeah, so it's going to be the finale. You are going to be the guy for our finale next week, and more leadership insights from Kevin Eshelman. So,
and a little bit of a pun. It'll be unforgettable.
It'll be unforgettable. All right. All right. God bless you, everyone. Thank you for joining the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast, where we learn these small things we can change and make a massive difference in our lives and the lives of those that we serve in leadership. God bless you. Have an amazing week in the Lord.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to LarryKreider.com.